Sounds like we're live. David?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this particular closing session for the Africa-Europe time slot for the Hot Summit. This is the Hot Summit 2021, and we are so thrilled to have all of your company from when we started the first time block to this second one, and then the Americas time block will be starting in about an hour from now. Without much ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speakers for the wrap-up session for this Africa-Europe time slot. I'd like to introduce Dees and Tyler to close the session for us, but they're going to have a really inspiring conversation, and I'd like to hand it over to Tyler for the next session.
Great, David. Thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thanks so much for spending a few minutes with us. So we're here to talk about the topics of community, openness, privacy, and we'll touch on the future of the web, hopefully. This is a virtual fireside chat. I'm Tyler Radford. I'm HOT's Executive Director. I'm really happy to be sitting down today with a colleague, a coach, and advisor, Desigan Chinniah, known as Dees, or sometimes by his Twitter handle, CyberDees. If I had to describe Dees using only hashtags, it might sound something like this: Africa, AI, AR, blockchain, bots, community, connectivity, crypto, gaming, IoT, open source, privacy, speech, startups, voice, VR, web. In addition to all that, he's also a self-described sneakerhead and father of two. So a bit more background on Dees. He originally hails from South Africa. He's a tech advisor with multiple advisory roles, and he's also an angel investor with a focus on diverse and underrepresented minority founders. Dees is a board member of Ushahidi, the Tor Project, and Grant for the Web. So today we'll have just under half an hour to explore some interesting themes together: community, openness, privacy, and the future of the web. I'd like to encourage everyone who's with us today for our virtual fireside chat to please add questions into the chat at any point during the conversation. If you hear something interesting or you'd like me to prompt Dees for a bit more context or a bit more background or a bit more detail on something, please go ahead and ask it at any time. So with that, Dees, a very warm welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks a lot, Tyler. It's fun being here.
Dees, I'd like to start out a little bit talking about your time at Mozilla, where you served in various roles over much of the past decade, including leading community at Mozilla Labs and tackling the pretty ambitious goal of helping people who were unconnected or do not have access to the internet in emerging economies to get online with Firefox OS. When we think about today's summit, the theme's all about community and about evolving local mapping ecosystems. So as HOT aims to mobilize and strengthen a movement of 1 million mappers in 94 countries over the next 3.5 years, what can we learn from your time at Mozilla?
Well, that's a loaded question to start with. I started Mozilla Firefox 3.8. It was 2010. Mozilla was only 100 people. So through that decade, I've touched a number of things within Mozilla. But certain things that sort of come to mind was, well, at the very start, 100 people, somewhere in the region of 350, 400 million users. Right, that's a pretty interesting ratio, right? That's like, a pretty large ratio per employee. And we were a bunch of misfits put together. And what I mean by that is, I think 100 people, there were maybe only 4 or 5 people that had so-called university degrees at the time. And here we were taking on, at that time, the big behemoth, Microsoft and Internet Explorer. So I think the biggest thing is, like, you can do it. Anyone can do it, right? Enough passion, enough drive, enough curiosity. I mean, my role at Mozilla, and this was, again, not just to employees, but to everyone involved in it, was go make the web better. That's your mission, right? You need to go and make the web better. Do whatever you need to do to make the web better. It's going to be hard. You're going to have fun along the way. You're going to make mistakes. Put your hand up, and we'll support you even if you do make a mistake. Just make the web better. And that's something that we just passed on to everyone and anyone. We also stayed very true to the Mozilla, at that time, the Mozilla mission and the principles. So, it was just something that was part of our DNA. It wasn't like every time someone asked a question, we went to look at a piece of paper or some sticker on the wall that says, what are the principles? It was just something that we knew. And very quickly, we could ascertain whether something was worth doing or not based on the principles and the manifesto that we had.
Dees, thanks. There was a couple of important things there that I was jotting down as you were talking. So the fact that you were around 100 people at the time, coincidentally, that's around the number of staff that are working with HOT at the moment. So also trying to support this big global idea with a relatively modest size of the organization. But beyond that, I'd like to touch on something you said. So this concept of anyone can do it and do what it takes to just try things out, experiment with things to make the web better. And I think we're at a similar position in a lot of ways, because we're really, as we kind of roll out some of our major grants programs to support communities to take action, we'd like to kind of have that same sort of mindset in place of let's try things out, let's experiment. And we also believe that really to grow this thing and to really get to the scale that we're talking about, to make the map better, to use an analogy of making the web better, we're trying to make the map better, right? So create the best map of our world in OpenStreetMap. We believe to do that, we need the world to be mappers, and to make it sustainable, we need participants really from every sector coming together, working together to advance open data projects and initiatives in their countries. So thinking about scaling for a few minutes, as an advisor, you advise multiple companies and projects that have really gone to significant scale. How do you think of an organization that still kind of has a relatively modest size like HOT, and supporting and bringing to scale a movement that's really much bigger?
Well, so, do the right things and the movement will come, right? Again, Firefox, we had an army of volunteers, right? I didn't even pay them. I mean, I think at best I paid them with stickers and T-shirts. And here's the interesting thing: like, when you meet these folks, and sometimes you realize that some of these folks are spending 5, 10, 15, 20 hours a week helping you. The obvious question is like, well, why are you doing that? Like, don't you have, other things to do? And the interesting piece is, for most of these people, they cannot explain why. And that's the magic, right? You've touched some sort of magic there when someone is actually spending 20 hours a week when they could be doing, and they are doing other things, just can't explain why. Part of it was we didn't create this us and them divide, make everyone feel the same. Like, even today in some parts of Firefox, the browser, volunteers and community members who are now module owners have more control over a certain module or piece of code than even a full-time staff member, right? That's pretty empowering. And the other part is empathy, right? How can you actually feel what's happening with the folks in their environments, as opposed to some mandate from somewhere in the world, whether that's in London, in the UK, or in New York City, or what have you. Like, go out, even I'm talking to Tyler here, the executive director, go out and feel what's happening on the ground with your communities, right? Show them empathy. Have your board meetings there. Like, have people actually feel what's happening on the ground. And people will believe that you're not just using them as a marketing tool or something like that, but you actually feel this pain.
Dees, I was thinking back to HOT's founding in 2010, and really we grew up out of the concept of a movement of people coming together, groups of volunteers coming together, even before we were registered as an organization. And so I think one of the challenges we have today, 10 years later, is really thinking about how do we maintain that sort of volunteer ethos throughout the work that we do. And as you said, make sure that everyone's contributions, regardless if you're paid or contributing on a volunteer basis, that all of those contributions are playing a really important role in the work that we're doing. You talked a little bit about empathy, and I wanted to kind of use that to segue into another topic around power, because I think you're hinting at that topic. So you, just thinking a little bit about the work you do, you talk and you write a lot about the open web. You co-founded Grant for the Web. For those of you who are joining us and haven't heard about Grant for the Web, it's a $100 million fund to seed an online monetization and payment ecosystem to challenge the web's most urgent issues: loss of privacy, centralization of power, inequalities in online participation. So kind of honing in, if you want to say more about Grant for the Web, please do, Dees. But I wanted to hone in a little bit on the inequalities part of it, because really what we're doing with OpenStreetMap and other projects like Mozilla or Wikipedia is really, I think, trying to change the balance of power, right? We're saying that any person anywhere in the world not only has the ability to, but should have the right to contribute to this global open data commons, which we call OpenStreetMap. And that's a really powerful thing, right? So I'm curious to get your take on that. What kind of role do you see with open platforms like OpenStreetMap or Wikipedia to kind of change the balance of power?
Yeah, so Grant for the Web, is one slice of that, right? It's looking at new business models on the web, specifically looking at creators. But what it's saying is that payments in general are broken today, or monetization is broken. One part of that is protocols, and coming from an open web perspective, I know you talk about platforms, Tyler. I quite like protocols, right? If anyone's interested in this topic, I believe a friend of mine, Mike Masnick from TechDebt's written a pretty interesting piece for the Night Journalism called "Protocols, Not Platforms." So I recommend anyone who's interested in that subject to kind of read that seminal piece. So one, we're looking at protocols, looking at new payment rails, and what are the things that are broken with payments today: interoperability, even MasterCard can't pay Visa, etc. Crossing borders, really micropayments, true micropayments, not 1 cent, 2 cent. We're talking 100 of a dollar per second in real time being streamed. So all of that's interesting. But then we are looking at, well, what are the methods that people are using today to monetize, right? So whether, and historically, it's, an ad network, maybe a paywall, maybe a subscription, and maybe the worst of the lot, which is I'll collate all the user data and I'll sell it on, right? And when you talk to most of these creators, whether they're an individual or even a big organization, most of them will say, like, hey, I started doing what I was doing because I enjoyed doing it and I want to give more exposure to the content that I'm writing. But at some point, like, something came through the door and I had to pay, I don't know, some server bill or something, right? And I had to figure out how to monetize this thing. And guess what? The easiest thing was an ad network. Now, even though I know there may be performance challenges, privacy challenges, data challenges, like all of these things, like I needed to figure out how to sustain this thing. And so that's what I did. They aspired to have other options, but they just didn't have it. So they're thinking about that. The challenge with that is, like, there is this inequality, getting back to your question in some way. Like, if you're a creator in New York City, or in London, or in Berlin, or somewhere else in some of the more built-up parts of the world, even if you had an ad network, you'd make a reasonable sum of money if you built up an audience and had good content. Now, if you were that same content creator, but you were a gaming streamer in Lagos, or poet in Sao Paulo, or just a blogger in Mumbai, right? Even if you built up an amazing audience and you stuck an ad network on there, you weren't going to get the best of the ads, and the CPMs, etc., that you were going to dictate from that would not be great, right? You would not be on par. And we're saying, how can we democratize that, right? If you create good content, why should it matter where you are in the world? If you're creating good content and you have an audience, can these opportunities allow you to make just as much as someone who's producing same or similar content in New York City or Seattle than you anywhere else in the world? And that's kind of the fundamental thing of Grant for the Web, right? Like, how do we explore, research, figure out new payment rails, new monetization methods? And it is a philanthropic grant, right? So it's all about experimentation. Let's see what happens.
Dees, one of the sort of founding principles behind in concepts behind OpenStreetMap and other projects like Wikipedia is that most of the, I would say a good portion, even through today, of contributors and contributions in terms of code, also in terms of map data, have been made on a voluntary basis. So in talking about Grant for the Web, it's really interesting because what you're introducing is essentially a new type of economic incentive, right, which kind of levels the playing field. And I'm wondering how we translate that to sort of open data projects and open participation projects where participants are not often paid for their contributions, right? They're making contributions on a volunteer basis, but there's pretty high barriers to that sometimes, both in terms of internet access, lack of equipment, just time is a factor. So how do you think about that? I'm curious if there's, do we need to, are we thinking about, should we be thinking about economic incentives a bit more than we are, or what are your thoughts on that?
So in some ways, like adding financial incentives muddies the water a little bit, right? I think back to, I'll use Mozilla examples, MDN, or even probably Wikipedia, etc., right? Like, you don't want to suddenly approach someone who's editing tens of hours of content on Wikipedia and then suddenly, say to them, thanks for that. Here's $5 or here's $10, right? Go buy yourself a coffee, right? All of a sudden they're going to be like, what? Is that what I'm worth to you? Like a coffee or two? Like, no, I'm not doing this anymore, right? So I think you've got to really be careful when it comes to financial incentives. The interesting thing, though, is, talk to some folks like from the Creative Commons community that, they almost all say is like, I do what I do because I really enjoy it. It gives me a purpose. I get a kick out of doing this. I meet amazing people, like all of those things. So I'm not doing this to make any money. And they're very adamant about that, right? Like, I upload hundreds of desktops and screensavers and wallpapers and what have you, and I just enjoy doing it. And I spend hours doing that. But we ask them, hey, what if, like, you weren't doing it for this monetary income, but what if for your efforts every now and again somebody said thank you, right? And that thank you was in the form of a gift or a handwritten postcard or something, a sticker, right? And you just see people's eyes light up. They're like, that would be amazing. Like, that wouldn't be my expectation. That wouldn't be why I would get out of bed every day. But if that did happen, like I got a little thank you, which is a subtle nuance, it would really make my day. So people do desire to be thanked or to be, seen as a group of people that, only a handful of people have the sticker or the T-shirt, right? It's a little bit of social credit, but it's not about like earning hundreds of dollars. That's not their motivation.
Thanks, Dees. Yeah, we have a number of contributors listening in today, so I'd encourage any of you that have comments on this to please ask questions or comment in the chat, and we can bring those to Dees. Dees, we just have a few minutes left, so maybe switching gears to one final topic today. We promised to talk a little bit about your work with Tor around privacy, and as OpenStreetMap is an open data project, I'm curious to kind of like talk about that tension a little bit. So if there is one. So you're a board member of the Tor project that, for those of you who may not be familiar, this is an organization that advances or works to advance human rights and defends privacy online through free software and open networks, most notably the Tor browser. Many of us around HOT are also advocates for individual privacy on the web, yet we champion open data at the same time. And we reason often that people themselves should make the decision, that each individual has the right to decide what data is open and what's not open. And in the case of OpenStreetMap, we generally believe that building more open data around our natural world and our built environment, places where people live, it's also a good thing because it may help to advance basic human needs, ensures no one's left out in humanitarian decision making. So I'd like to kind of hear you weigh in on the balance there. Do you see a tension between open data projects and data privacy? Do we need both?
I'm a pragmatist, even though people know me from Firefox and Tor and the open source movement and a whole lot of other things. So I'm pragmatic, right? And so I do believe there's a need or probably a place to play on both sides here. I ultimately want the user to be in control, though, right? The user to make that choice. I, for example, I can't see a world where users could have all this data that's theirs, that they have total control over, and maybe they can turn on and off switches, right, that allow access to data, but it's still in control to an organization or an individual or a service as and when they want to, for an hour, for a week. I do like, and I think there are interesting projects that are looking at that. Dare I say, I could even go as far as saying like someone having control of their data and even monetizing it, right? Hey, yes, you can have access to this data as long as you abide by how you keep it and store it, etc. And you have access for it for 2 hours because actually that's all you need it for. And you're going to remunerate me some money for that? Fine. Or you give me something else. I think those are interesting dynamics that are going to play out, right? Most organizations start from the starting point of good, right? And of course, legislation and regulatory things like GDPR, etc., COPA, etc., will mean that most people start from that perspective. But there are going to be some bad players in that. But I do believe that the good, like you said, saving lives, bringing basic needs, stopping internet shutdowns, bringing financial access to people will far outweigh the bad.
Dees, we have an audience question I'm going to throw at you now. So from your experience with different institutions, organizations, and communities, any tips on building trust within shared spaces?
Well, ultimately, when it comes to communities, it's people, right? And so how do we build trust with people today? Like, we have conversations, we spend time with them, we get to know each other. And that was a huge part of, to some people, I remember this clearly in the Mozilla world, it was like, you're spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars flying around the world and just having a good time, which is certainly part of it. I got to see the world. But that was building trust, right? And comes back to empathy and all of those other things I mentioned, like actual time with people. And of course, in the digital world, that becomes harder. But I think it's just understanding motives, definitely understanding, why is someone involved in your community? I've met many people within the Mozilla community that was like, well, I'm here because like, I don't know why I'm here, but it turns out if you actually figure it out, it's like, well, being seen on the About credits at Mozilla means my employment opportunities in my home country go up 100-fold, right? Some people are just there because they want to hang out with their friends. I was in Tunisia and I was chatting to one of the community members, and almost flippantly, the response was something like, I don't use Firefox. Like, I don't care about it. And I was like, okay, so why are you within the Mozilla community locally in Tunis? He's like, well, look at all these other people, Sarah and Mohammed and they're my friends. Like, they absolutely love this community and love Firefox and Mozilla. I like hanging out with them. I happen to have some skills maintaining web servers and a whole lot of other things. That's why I'm part of the Mozilla community, to hang out with my friends, which is like, it just shows you that everyone's motivation is very different, and you have to understand the motivations to start building that trust and understanding how the conversation needs to evolve.
Definitely. Building trust, having fun. That's all a very important part of what we do. So I'm going to go to one last question for you, Dees, and then we'll need to wrap up. So when, and this is from our participants again, when and how do open data projects become a disruption to the big tech giants and no longer the underdogs?
So in that scenario, it comes down to how's the data being used, right? I feel like I've lived around many lives around many organizations that can build good open data, like pipes, community driven, all of those pieces. And that's great. But how does that actually then take the next step to actually being a product or service that gets used, that data being used? I find a ton of organizations, some of them that we've just mentioned or I've worked for, that are really amazing at collecting the data and getting community involvement, which is amazing. Repositories of all sorts, shapes, and sizes. But then that data just stays there, stagnant. Nothing gets actually done, right? No service, no product actually comes off the back of that. And I feel like that's the 0 to 1. Everyone's really excited about building the pipeline and collating the data and making it secure, but no one has a plan for, well, what could this thing be used for, right? How can it actually impact the world? And that's the part I encourage people to look at, right? And that's where the disruption of the big tech giants are going to come in, like not just the collation.
Dees, that's one of our major themes for this year, is moving from data to people and impact, and also product, as you mentioned. So making sure that the incredible data that we've heard about today that's being collected in so many communities actually gets put to use for things that have a real meaning in people's lives and can have a real impact on the humanitarian sector. So thank you so much, Dees, for being with us today. Thanks to the participants. There was a lot of great questions coming in. If we didn't get to your question, we will share those with Dees, so you have them, Dees. And if you'd like to respond to any after the session, we'd welcome that. And we also welcome you to continue being part of the OpenStreetMap community and the HOT community. Please join us for future events as well. And with that, we'll wrap up. Dees, thanks again for being here.
Tyler and Dees, thank you so much for that inspiring closing remarks that you've given. Thank you so much. It's really an inspiring ending to what has been an amazing summit so far. And a word of thank you and gratitude to our very own speakers today from the different parts of the world that have given presentations at the HOT Summit today. We appreciate your time and commitment. Thank you so much. And another shout out to our sponsors that helped to enable the summit to happen. Today, we want to thank Meta. Thank you so much. Amazon Web Services, AWS, Esri, CryptGen. We appreciate you so very much. And of course, a huge thank you to each and every one of you that spent some time with us today. Without you, none of what we are looking at and none of what we are working on would be possible. So we look forward to continue the conversations, partnerships, and learning from every single person that attended the summit today. And don't forget that we all have one more block that is going to begin in a couple of minutes, and that is for the Americas region. It will be starting at the top of the hour. You can refer to the schedule on the program for you to see what's coming up. And before signing off today, do keep a look out for recordings from the summit and the Ghost Chess winner announcement, which will be happening on our social media platforms. And for any other information that you would like to hear about the summit, please do reach us at summit@hotosm.org with any questions. And all right, so thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you in OpenStreetMap. Goodbye and happy mapping, everyone from around the world. Thank you so much for joining us today.